Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are just on 1 minute past 7, so I thought we would begin. I have a couple of things to read out. Good evening, it says here. I've already done that. There's no fire alarm planned for this evening. Should the alarm sound, please leave via the nearest available emergency exit. The two closest exits are through the glass doors over there, or the door behind you to my left, it says here. The glass doors or the doors at the back of the room here. The assembly point is outside Café des Amis. The best way out is the gates outside will be locked at sunset, which was now some time ago. Please note the toilets upstairs are out of use, so please use the available accessible toilet downstairs. Members of the public are welcome to make their own recordings of the meeting using whatever non-disruptive methods they think are suitable. The meeting is being minuted and recorded and will be available to listen to via the council's website. As I've said, the Westgate garden gates on the riverside are locked at sunset, so members of the public must leave the Guildhall by the side exit behind the glass door. Lovely stuff. So, first of all, do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Jay Stockley and Mr Marsh.
And do we have any substitutes?
Councillor Howes is present as a substitute for Councillor Stockley.
Thank you very much. And do we have any declarations of interest by members or officers? Mr Brady.
Thank you. I'm just trying to hunt for what item it is, but it will be for the 8th annual parking review. I've got a property in Roper Road, flat in Roper Road, so I won't be voting on that. I'll be abstaining. But it's in my division. I've had lots of emails about it, so if need be, I will be speaking on it. If I don't need to speak on it, then thank you.
Any other declarations of interest? Mr Baker.
Thank you, Chair. As the KC Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport, as many recommendations of this board tonight will be coming in my direction, I feel it'd be appropriate that I'll happily comment on various things if needed, but I won't be taking part in any votes because it would seem a little bit silly to choose whether or not to recommend something to myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Baker. Do we have anybody else that'd like to make a declaration? Lovely. And if anything does occur as we go through the discussions later on and you think it might be an interest, then please feel free to volunteer it at the time. Don't feel that if you've not spoken now, you don't have to. So, public participation. We have, I believe, 7 public speakers this evening. I suspect you've already been briefed as to where to go. We'll call you up. And what I would say to everybody in the room, councillors and members of the public alike, is people are here to be heard. We want to have a good, open discussion. So let people speak. I will, from the chair, invite people to speak and respond as and when the need arises. I shall move on. The speakers will be heard directly before their item. So if you're following on the agenda, I believe we have 6 on one item and 1 on another. So that will be the way it goes. So if we move on, the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of January. Mr Dance.
Yeah, on page 4, you've got JTB 9, Highways Works Programme, and it's got in Appendix H, Combined Members Grant Programme Update, schemes funded, supported by Mark Dance were not shown. Well, they're not shown again, they weren't shown then, and I'm going to be mentioning them later. So it is a vehicle activated sign on Borstal Hill, and I'll refer to that on item 6400. So it just appears nowhere, and I don't just want to pop it on everyone at that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Was it item number again was, sorry?
6400 on the Highways Works Programme.
Thank you. We'll make sure that's noted and obviously taken later on as well. Thank you. Do we have any other points on the minutes? Mr Brady.
Thank you, Chair. On attendance, I was there. I'm not on the attendance list. My name is on the voting list. So can you just add me, please, as county councillor? Thank you.
We will get that amended. Does that I'm assured that we can now take that on general assent if there aren't any other issues with the minutes. Lovely. So carried. Item number 6. When your name is called, please come forward to the spot and press the button on the microphone. So first up, could we have Sally Ann Baxter, please?
Okay, thank you for allowing me to speak today following the submission of the petition requesting a review of the newly installed one-way system in Herne Bay. Since submitting this petition, a lot has happened, and subsequently I've been asked to be a member of the working group. You could say that the 1,800 people who signed the petition asking for a review and subsequently its submission to this board has actually achieved its aim. And those attending the 600-strong public meeting held on the 30th of January in King's Hall clearly agree that in the main they agreed with the 20-mile-hour implementation and the cycle pass, as they're clearly within the objectives of Kent Active Travel Scheme. However, there are stronger views regarding the closure of Central Parade. I understand that the decisions for the changes in Herne Bay were made on the information and the circumstances available at the time. I appreciate the effort and thought that went into making these decisions, although I'm very sceptical that an extensive consultation was carried out in 2022, specifically regarding the closure of Central Parade. And since talking to council officers at the working group, I understand that the closure of Central Parade was suggested as a good idea, and officers were too heavily relied on those who suggested it were truly representing all of the community. As a result, we discussed that the proactive use of focus groups on these types of projects as part of the consultation process could be very useful. So perhaps this is something that could be factored into your future consultation processes. It might have saved us all a lot of heartache. I'm pleased to report that the working group was very productive and the discussions were expertly led by Nicola Fludgate. I felt listened to, and everyone was shown respect when they shared their views. So thank you for asking me to be on the working group. In my opinion, it was very constructive. I have trust in the team responsible for this project, who genuinely wish to provide a scheme that not only fits with the active travel strategy, but also meets the needs of all of the community, including wheelers and walkers. They certainly heard loud and clear that the community does not want the permanent closure of Central Parade, and I agreed with other members of the working group and officers on this point. My understanding is that, along with other options discussed, this will be worked up by officers in readiness for our next meeting. My plea to yourselves is to find a swift way forward and not to request any decisions to wait to the next JTB meeting, as this needs to be sorted before the summer months so not to as negatively impact visitors to the town. I love living in Herne Bay. It's a traditional seaside town, and I'm not alone in enjoying its drive along the seafront when returning home. I believe that with your leadership and expertise, along with the working group, we can find a better option forward for the community and visitors of Herne Bay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Aside from anything, can I commend you on just leaving 3 seconds at the end there? We will open this item to debate when everybody has spoken, but we're going to go through all of the public speakers first. So I'd like to ask Martin Head, please.
Good evening. I'm sure all councillors and officers are acutely aware of the current scrutiny from Herne Bay residents regarding the Active Travel Scheme plan. Tonight, I would like to raise significant concerns around the implementation of the scheme, specifically regarding the Prohibition of Traffic Movements Order 2022 and the subsequent Traffic Movements Consolidation Order 2024. In the 2022 order, Richmond Street was listed as being one way between the High Street and Central Parade in a northerly direction. In the Joint Transportation Board meeting of 30th of January this year, the Active Travel Report noted, quote, with a few amendments required to alter the flow of traffic, specifically on Richmond Road, due to delivery issues with access to the Texaco garage, which were not known at the design stage, unquote. Those delivery requirements have been known since the garage was built many years ago, and numerous Herne Bay residents, including myself, were fully aware of those delivery requirements. To say that they were, quote, not known at the design stage, unquote, is a complete fabrication. The traffic direction on Richmond Street was subsequently amended to two-way. It was then noted in the minutes of the said JTB meeting that, quote, lessons had been learned from the Herne Bay Plaza experience, unquote. 3 weeks after that JTB meeting, the new Traffic Movements Consolidation Order 2024 was submitted and the public notice ended yesterday. It shows Richmond Street back to the northerly direction only and therefore zero access for the tankers into the Texaco garage. Did no one listen? I have subsequently reviewed the 4 tiles that relate to the Herne Bay Active Travel Scheme, AU 155, 156, AP 155 and 156, and found 27 errors in the signage and road direction layout. Lessons clearly have not been learned despite assurances. Traffic orders are still being filed with numerous mistakes, signage is still not being installed as per the plan, etc. I sat in this Guildhall last week when Councillor Charlotte Cornell, on an unrelated matter, stated that all maps should be clear and contain correct information when with them. This statement clearly does not seem to apply to the Herne Bay Active Travel Scheme. I would be grateful if KCC officers could urgently explain whether A, Richmond Street is going back to a northerly direction only from the High Street to Central Parade as per the order, or B, what lessons were learnt and why an incorrect version of the tiles were submitted with the Traffic Movement Consolidation Order 2024 despite clear and unequivocal evidence showing it should be two-way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take those points after the rest of the speakers, but I've made a note of them here. Thank you. And Mike Highland, please.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Michael Highland, a long-term resident of Herne Bay. With regards to active travel, what could and should have been a bonus to the town and people of Herne Bay, to put it mildly, is a shameful, embarrassing, avoidable mess. Those of you that have had the opportunity to read my report circulated yesterday are now fully aware the Plaza scheme has been funded through false statements to such an extent it can never achieve the description that attracted the funding. In November 2022, the JTB unanimously voted, although the minutes are very limited, for the active travel scheme, Herne Bay Station Road to Central Parade, which included the Plaza, which was previously funded. Which board, committee, group compiled the false funding application resulting in the misuse of public funds? Active Travel England were misled. Why? The JTB was misled with a flawed consultation report. Again, why? Who is accountable? Is it Canterbury City Council? Kent County Council? Councillors? Officers? Perhaps ultimately it's the person that signed the KCC letter dated the 6th of August 2021. This cannot be brushed under the carpet. Who is investigating to establish responsibilities? I condemn the recent and all acts of vandalism. There are now calls for a protest march. Will this attract further vandalism? This cannot enhance Herne Bay's image. The Plaza needs to go and go now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, we'll get to those points afterwards. Can we have Joe Marshall, please?
I'm Joe Marshall. I live at 5 Westcliff Drive, and it's the Hampton Pier end of Herne Bay. So good evening, gentlemen and lady councillors. I'd just like to ask, this new Spanish Plaza that's been put in and installed, has the council had a business plan in place so that events can be staged during the summer? Would the council be charging rent for the events if it goes ahead? Would the council set up a public liability insurance to cover events that's going to be staged? I'm sure this would be a major concern to people if it's pushed through. Just to add, due to the fact that the plaza could probably only be used on public holidays, summer months, sustained, subject to the weather, and the probability, 75% of the year, it will be used only, especially during the winter months, which it can't be used, subject to the weather. It seems sad that this project has cut the seafront in two, depriving people of Herne Bay a drive along the seafront when people have probably enjoyed this for years. Do the council not think they could have made a case for active travel, promote walking and cycling, that the money on offer could have been better used to level the beaches and the King's Hall and all the way along, at least a quarter of a mile, to stop stones from the beach being washed up in bad weather, which causes havoc to the walk and the cycle. This must be what active travel would endorse, I would imagine. Clearing the stones must be a significant amount of money cost to the council. So, has anyone ever looked at this? It's a mess. They still want clearing up now, the stones. And people walk actively along there, and this is what active travel's all about. And what we've got with the plaza, and it's caused people problems. I'm not sort of politically involved, but to me, people have been saying to me, what's going on? And it seems that people are barely being upturned with this. Now, I live up the other end of Herne Bay, and I walked round 2 streets and just knocked on the doors and asked them. Some was active travel, they didn't know about active travel, but the plaza, they said, why they done it? And you try and explain to them, but I was just asking a yes or no, are you agreeing with it? I didn't want to get into the political side of it. And then people was asking me, what about the 20 mile an hour? You've got the street alongside it, it's 30 mile an hour. And I think people are confused. And you councillors, you should have come to a decision and listen to the people. Wherever this is done and whatever it's been done, it seems totally wrong, and people are up in arms about it. And I felt strongly enough to come and make a point tonight that it's not been clarified properly. So thanks for listening to me.
Thank you very much. We have Mr. Hutton. Mr. Hutton? Apologies, I spoke away from the microphone there.
Good evening. My name is Geoffrey Hutton. I'm 68 years of age and have lived in Herne Bay all my life. I've seen a lot of changes in the road layouts in Herne Bay in my lifetime, but this is the worst one yet. I have a passion for the sea and the seafront, as a lot of us do in the bay. That's why we live there. I'm sorry I could not come to your walkabout the other day, as it was not advertised the day or the time. I would have been there with you. I have a full car licence and an HGV licence, and I could show you all the problems with it, car and commercial use. 20 mile an hour, most people have no problems with this. The problem is the plaza. People from 2 public meetings want the seafront to be 2-way in its entire length. We are a seaside town for everybody, visitors, motorists, cyclists and pedestrians. As you all say, it's a pig's ear now, and you would like to change it. Why are we not doing it? If it's money, take it out of the billions of pounds that the road users pay in taxes and fines from the government. My 2 questions to you today are, can you supply me with the cyclists that used the train 3 years ago, and sorry, can I start again? Could you produce the survey of the cyclists that used the train 3 years ago and what do you predict the use of it? The new system in place, I've seen not one person use that cycling route. Second question, the survey 2.5 years ago that I took part in with a lot of others, the result was 53% said no to the new system. When it was announced that you were going ahead with it, I asked a previous councillor why. He said to me, well, sometimes we know better than the public. I think that's not the response we should be looking for. Are public surveys not worth the effort, or are they just a tick box exercise, or am I getting the wrong message here? I will wait for your response on these two things. I have a lot more to say, but I've come close to my time now. Thank you for listening on this, and I will leave you with the saying, the only problem with the one-way system is it doesn't go both ways. Get rid of the plaza and the one-way system and make everybody happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final speaker on this note, Roland Barber.
Yes, good evening. My name is Roland Barber. I'm a retired traffic police officer. So my concerns, apart from the so-called plaza, which shouldn't be called a plaza, it's especially not a Spanish plaza, it's just a mess. Anyway, the problems at the moment are all the traffic is being diverted to the high street. People are not taking any notice of any of the signs. I personally have evidenced 180 vehicles contravening the regulations since the 16th of February. 41 of those going the wrong way down the one-way street. I personally have had at least 10 near misses with people who do not comply with the regulations coming towards me. This is a complete and utter mess. There's going to be a serious accident. Are the councillors going to take responsibility when such an accident happens and this construction is deemed a significant part of that accident? It's going to happen. I don't care what anybody says. It will. If safety and traffic is part of the regulations and the commitment, a Freedom of Information with Kent Police has identified no speeding offences along the High Street or anywhere else in Herne Bay other than Mickleburgh Hill for the last 5 years. Also in the last 5 years, prosecutions for moving traffic offences have been equated to 1 every 9 days. Since the 16th of February, it's 6 a day that I know about. The one-way system is not designed for what it is. The number of HGVs driving down the wrong way, coaches cannot turn up to Pier Avenue. They're having to reverse down Central Parade. There is going to be a fatality. It's not a question of if, it's when. Therefore, I think with the way this is going, unless something is done, there is going to be a lot more issues. The cycle track I've got no great problems with, other than along Central Parade. Since the 16th of February, I personally have witnessed 35 cyclists using Central Parade, of which half don't use the cycle lane. So if it's going to be used, let's encourage people to use it. I'm not averse to the 20-mile-an-hour limit, other than from what Mr. Watkins has told me by email, it's going to be self-enforcing and or a community speed watch team. This is not going to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for everyone who's spoken, and thank you everybody for listening. Those are all the speakers we have listed on that. I'm just going to pop the microphone off. Those are all the speakers we have listed on this. We'll open this up to debate for the board in a moment, but we have a report from Jamie Watson, Head of Transportation for KCC. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A Senior Programme Manager rather than Head of Transportation, but you've just given me a promotion. Thank you. This report provides an update on the Herne Bay Active Travel Scheme that KCC was successful in bidding for funding from Active Travel England. It outlines the procedures undertaken that the scheme went through a consultation process following Canterbury City Council requesting this scheme to be promoted as a priority of theirs, and complements their Levelling Up Fund bid, which included further cycling and walking links to the seafront. The scheme has been constructed with outstanding defects still to be addressed. During construction of Central Parade closure and some of the one-way roads, concerns have been raised and written representations received, including the petition. KCC's Cabinet Member for Highways and Transportation has committed to ensuring a working group be set up with a purpose to hear from a range of the community to understand the details around their concerns. The initial meeting took place on the 13th of March, consisting of members of the public, KCC officers, elected members and local councillors to understand their concerns around the specific elements of the scheme so we can address them where possible. The minutes and terms of reference will be published shortly, hopefully tomorrow, along with the names of representatives involved in the working group. Subsequent meeting dates are still to be confirmed for that working group. The working group will present their findings to the Cabinet Member for Highways and Transportation, and that's likely to be around mid-April. KCC's website will be updated with the minutes of the meeting in terms of reference shortly. Sorry, I said that before. And that's my summary of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jamie. I'll open it up in a minute. I think just in terms of where we go from here in terms of the role of JTB within this, as you'll see from the agenda, this is to note for this board this evening. We won't be making any decisions. In fact, this is not the decision-making body for the scheme and changes going forward. As was noted so eloquently by the speakers, things have moved very quickly and very rapidly, and I think KCC are to be commended for getting the working group together. It's already met, and as Jamie mentioned, the minutes and terms of reference will be published probably tomorrow on the website. What I would like in future is that working group potentially reports back to JTB with its findings, but I think, as has been noted, time is of the essence, and JTB is probably not the body to make things happen quickly in this case. That working group does have the ability to recommend directly to the Cabinet Member for Highways at KCC, who I suspect will want to move a bit more quickly than the process of JTB meetings. I don't want to second guess what that working group does, but I would also suggest for those of you who aren't members of it at the moment, I think there are some members here this evening, and there are some members that will be known through that process as well, that you have a forum there where you can express those specific concerns with the scheme, and hopefully that we can get to a resolution for those as well very quickly. That being said, if there are any members of the JTB that would like to speak on this issue, I will open the floor now. Mr. Baker.
I'd just say a few words. I think it's quite right what you said in terms of speed being of the essence, and as much as I would like to have future discussions at JTB to allow more oversight, I think the reality is that once the working group comes up with those final recommendations, as Jamie Watson's mentioned, mid-April probably, that will be the time when I'll be having to make a decision, and I'm keen to, because clearly, as the first speaker who referenced that they're a member of the working group said, in terms of the plaza, which is one of the key areas of contention, I wouldn't want to prejudge what the recommendation is going to be. I don't know exactly where that recommendation is going to land, but I think we can already see a glide path of sorts emerging towards where it may land. And that is basically doing away with it and having traffic flowing along Central Parade again, which then, removes some of the issues relating to coaches and everything that we'll know about. Now, as said, I think waiting for the next JTB, getting too close to summer, we can't really afford to do that. Summer in Herne Bay, as we know, is an absolutely crucial time. That April point is key for me. And thank you for those words you said. I mean, I do appreciate that, it's quite easy to see that this hasn't been moving quickly, but at the same time, I suppose all of us have seen council process and trying to change things relative to that. Perhaps it has, because by creating this working group and going for this review as the petition initially asked for, we're really creating something from the highway side of things that's unique for Herne Bay. It wasn't as though there was a process to pull off the shelf that had been used elsewhere that we could just instantly say, here's how we're doing the review. And it also is important to tie in that timescale with the independently conducted Stage 3 road safety audit, because you wouldn't want a series of recommendations coming from a working group that's then mixed around by the independent recommendations from a safety audit that highways officers then have to follow. So they're all dovetailing, they'll all be happening at the same time. Speed is therefore of the essence as much as we can do, and I will happily stick to that. Of course, any comments that members here make tonight from either authority, clearly they will be considered, I think, as part of that when the recommendations come out. I think that's the fairest way of doing it. Happy to get the minutes once they're received. And just going back to all the public speakers, I think that the points are well made. They have been made in various fora. And I think while we're not going to go back, unless the working group come up with something that's completely unexpected to exactly how things were, because there are elements of this project that are perhaps working better than others or more accepted than others, perhaps. That focus for me is, I think, as things stand, looking at getting the seafront back open as soon as possible, very much ahead of the summer, without, just to stress, prejudging those final thoughts and formal thoughts that come from the working group, because I do think it is important in all of this, as I've mentioned to some who've contacted me, that this review follows a sort of staged process, so that, if discussions have to happen with the scheme funders at some point, we can say this wasn't just an emotional reversal, it was a staged process of review. And that makes a big difference, because, I would rather not be in a position to have to start scrabbling around for local highways funding pots, because heaven knows we need to be spending those on road condition to pay back a faceless almost government executive agency who do have a lot of money, but do have processes to be followed. So thanks for that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Councillor Howes.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like to thank KCC for getting this done so swiftly, because it will mean that I'll be able to walk my dog and stop being spoken to every sort of 100 yards. I was walking the dog yesterday, some old guy stopped me and shouted, "Oi, what's going on in Herne Bay with the roads? Why can't we get it sorted?" Then same thing happened in the afternoon. So it's just a repeat business. And I'd like to thank all of the speakers who've raised some of the points which people have said to me, but there's also some other points. Somebody, I think, it's been described as a bit of a dog's dinner. No, by somebody in the streets. Yeah, it was in the afternoon I saw this person, Neil. And they said nothing's working, okay? People have been quite positive about some parts of it, but I've had moans about each and every part. The cycle track in Richmond Street. It's just not safe. You're cycling along parked cars. The bit of a road by the parked cars hasn't been repaired for years by the looks of it. It's just dangerous. It just doesn't make sense. I'm a cyclist. I don't use it, and I don't know any other cyclists who use it because it is full of potholes. So I don't really know what to say. I also don't use a cycle lane on Central Parade because when I turn that way towards the bandstand, coming down Station Road, it's just easier for me to follow the road round. Now, because otherwise it's going in the right-hand lane and then having to go back and cross from the cycle lane to use the rest of Central Parade. So that's something else. One of the speakers mentioned the 20 mile an hour is quite popular. It is the most popular out of it, but it's also very confusing. And I'll be honest, it appears to me as if whoever decides on the 20 mile an hour limit got a dartboard and a map of Herne Bay and just threw the darts into it. It doesn't seem to make rhyme or reason for a lot of people. It's just very, very confusing. And then we've got the plaza. I've got a friend who's a coach driver, and his company were actually asked to test their coach at turning up Pier Avenue. And I won't repeat what he said, apart from the fact that not a chance it'll rip the guts out of my vehicle. That's why coach drivers don't want to turn up Pier Avenue. It's just got a knack of their vehicles. I'm going to disagree slightly with Mr Barber, who said that the traffic's going into the High Street. I don't think it's just going into the High Street, because going down Herne Bay High Street is a mess. There are so many cars parked illegally on there that you can't drive down there. So it's going down Kings Avenue and where I live in Western Avenue. Since this scheme came into place, we've seen an increase in large vehicles going down there and also coaches, which has led to my next door neighbour complaining about his property shakes a lot more than it ever did because of the size of the vehicles going down there. And on top of that, we've got a lot of speeding still. People aren't sticking to the 20 mile an hour because it's not enforced. I know that Western Avenue near me is very, very dangerous because there's a slight bend in the road, and that's where there's been a few serious accidents over the last 5 years. I would suggest it's one of the most dangerous roads in Herne Bay, and we're making this worse by having large vehicles going down there. What we've also done is we've made it worse in terms of the air quality by having the larger vehicles there. So if the working group is able to, it would be really interesting to look at the impact, not just on the high street, but where this traffic has moved to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor House. I think that's a very good point in terms of having a look at the air quality issues that might be caused by this as well, just as part of that group. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. It's in my ward. I'm the ward councillor, one of the ward councillors. A couple of points. Yes, I see the cycle route being used more. Unfortunately, all the signs have been ripped out for some violent thing. I am getting, personally, residents approaching me that actually like the plaza. They like the fact that you can't race along, the cars can't tear down the street, this, that and the other. One of the ways we could, looking at it yesterday, change part of the road layout is as you come up Pier Avenue, I know it won't help lorries and coaches, stuff like that, but to go up Pier Avenue, and at the moment you can't, as you come up Pier Avenue, you can't turn, I get left and right muddled up, you can't turn left. It's sort of almost a dead zone there in front of the flats. Now, if you was to make that the other way round, so vehicles can come up Pier Avenue, turn left along that route, and then they're back on the high street. So basically, you're bypassing the plaza, if for want of a better word. So it's just a suggestion. It's a change of route. It's a road that not really used very much, and that would keep the flow of the traffic going that way. So you'd come up there, so to more or less you are still driving all the way down the seafront. It does. Residents are telling me that they like the fact that you've got the area that's pedestrianised. You haven't got to worry about the children in it, and you know, I'd like to see at least the summer use of it. So actually, we can actually then decide what it wants. I am slightly concerned that we've got a vigilante type setup coming forward into Herne Bay that's causing quite a lot of disruption, you know, and I get the feeling of people, but I'm here to obviously represent the other people that aren't here and are happy with the situation that we have actually got. As for the highways and stuff, that can be changed around by a few bits of tweaks and stuff like that. Okay, that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Anybody else like to speak on the issue? Oh, sorry, Mr. Sowell, I've already noted you.
Thank you, Chair. I think some credit has to go to Mr. Baker and to KCC for acting so swiftly on this. I'm very, very worried, though, that other schemes that we've been told will be working fantastically, like the Windsheep Gyratory scheme, for example, may well fall apart completely, as this clearly has. We do have to ask what has gone wrong here. It appears someone has just sat at a desk and come up with a scheme rather than actually considering what it will mean in real terms. The report mentions about leaving time for this to bed in, and I know things have moved on since that report. My main worry about that is as weather gets warmer, we're going to see a lot more traffic in Herne Bay, and the incidents that have been mentioned by the speakers today about the dangers of of traffic, going the wrong way up roads and so on, will only get worse as that traffic increases as the holiday season starts. So it is very, very important that, I mean, it's an old phrase, that we learn lessons from this, but there are obviously significant lessons to learn about what has gone wrong, so that schemes like this don't end up happening before we've clearly considered what the problems are. I don't know if anyone can answer this, but I wonder as well, what's the situation where KCC have taken money from Active Travel to produce something like this? If the scheme gets changed or scrapped or whatever in some way, do KCC have to pay money back?
Anybody competent to give an answer to that direct question at the moment, or do we need to refer that? Jamie?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just making some notes. We've still got to work with Active Travel England to see what they would like us to do. So it's not straightforward. We'd have to give it back if everything reverted back to its original condition. We'd work with Active Travel England to see what the benefits are of the remaining elements if things are to change. So I can't answer specifically, but we'd make every effort to make sure that they don't want us to hand the money back. So if we can not hand it back, we'll try not to, but it's not been agreed just yet.
Thank you. Mr. Watkins.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all the speakers who've come here tonight and spoken, and all the other residents who are here as well. And as the Kent County Councillor for the area, like you, I wish that we had got more upfront feedback on the scheme ahead of starting to build it, because as it's been painful for you, you can probably imagine, it's been quite painful for me as well. But, we are where we are, and we will have to learn lessons from the consultation material that went out that wasn't strong enough. But looking forward, I'm really pleased that Kent County Council did agree to the working group, and we've got all bases covered there in terms of representatives from different parts of the community, motorists, cyclists, pedestrians, disabled people, people who run businesses, who run events, people who represent other people travelling around the town, including disability groups. So we had a productive first meeting, and look, we're trying to come to a consensus for the community. I get people who are very keen on many aspects of the scheme, of the scheme, right to me, including the plaza. I get many people right to me who don't like any of it, and I get many people who like some bits and don't like other bits. We've got to work together as a group on that working group to make recommendations to the cabinet member, who I thank for coming along tonight, and hope that he can convince Active Travel England not to ask for the money back, and then we can go forward on that basis, and that will include looking at reopening Central Parade, so the plaza area, to traffic again. And we still want to keep the principles of the scheme alive, and they are worth reminding ourselves about, because we have some terrible challenges in our county. Issues such as inactivity and obesity are on the rise. Mental health issues are on the rise. Well, helping people walk and wheel and to cycle around the town for small journeys is a real way of making people fitter and healthier and making people happier. Being outside the wonderful seafront we've got in Herne Bay and enjoying that, that's very valuable. And equally, if we get some people to walk and wheel and scoot, then that means there'll be less motorists on the road. That means for the other people who drive, they will see less congestion. So, that's the principle of what we're trying to do. There are things we're going to look at now, like reopening Central Parade, and I'm very hopeful that we can keep the principle and help more people walk and wheel and cycle, whilst not inconveniencing lots of people, as clearly the current feedback shows the closure of the plaza area does. So, it's very much what I think we're all trying to work towards, given, some constraints which have already been referenced. And like everyone else here, really want to see this happen quickly, make the recommendations to Neil Baker and his team quickly, and then implement the agreed solution very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. Ms. Dawkins.
Right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say a quick word. I'm a Canterbury City South KCC councillor, and I wanted to say thank you to the speakers to come in tonight, because that's really important. And it's for the power of the voice, the power of the people that gets things changed. So it's really important that you've used that democratic right, if you like. So I'm really pleased. Just to reassure you as well, in the division that I'm in, there's been a scheme that had its own fair share of kind of discontent and stuff, which I've been having to deal with. So, the active travel scheme is, as Councillor Watkins has said, it's all about trying to get people to get out the cars and walk and enjoy the exercise and all that sort of stuff. But obviously there's a lot of issues about that change, about all the things you've got to change, the road network and all this sort of stuff. And it is a massive learning curve, and we can only do that together. So I just kind of wanted to make, it's compromises, I guess that's the word that's going to come up probably. And then the scheme has been put in, it costs like a lot of money. It would be quite devastating if KCC had to pay that all back. So if there was a compromise that could be found that used the scheme somehow, so that it was recognised on paper that it didn't have to be paid back, then that would be what I'd like to see. But obviously that works for everybody. But anyway, I just wanted to sort of make a comment to say thanks for turning up tonight and saying what you have to say.
Thanks, Mel. I think that's a good point on which to sum up, unless anybody else has another point to make. Oh, it's Councillor. I was checking whether it's Councillor or Mr. It's Councillor Bothwell.
Thank you very much. And yes, thank you to the members of the public who have highlighted, in addition to the kind of ongoing problems with the scheme, the current dangers to pedestrians and other road users. I'm wondering whether increased enforcement will be put in place in the meantime until such changes as may be agreed are put in place will be implemented. Will there be any greater enforcement of the one-way system and speed limits within the scheme so that no one does die in the meantime? Thank you.
If I could, I mean, it's a fair question, and of course I should always stress, without wishing to sound boring, Kent County Council are not the enforcement authority, of course, that is the police, with some exceptions with new legislation. In terms of the 20, and thank you, Councillor Bothwell, for this, because one of the speakers did raise it. I mean, it is, and we don't shy away from this, it is established policy of Kent Police that it is they who only support 20 mile an hour where it is self-enforcing. They only, in quite specific extreme examples, actively enforce 20 mile an hour across Kent. Obviously, different police forces take a different approach. London's very different, but we know that London's very different for many reasons. And I think members who've been doing this for a while will be aware that to get a 20 in place, average speeds have to be 24 mile an hour or below to start with. So has been seen elsewhere that merely by signing a lower speed limit without engineering works does have an impact. Faversham's an example. There are examples you can point to of previous speeds, after speeds. But it is about self-enforcing, and I suppose it does come down to the fact that the more people who do start following a new speed limit, the more that will have to, by definition of being behind them. But of course, as Councillor Howes has also said, there are questions, and lots of people have raised this. I mean, I have a number of people saying, the 20 is as good as far as it goes, but why isn't X, Y, and Z road included, or why isn't the whole length of Canterbury Road included? Could give countless examples. I think that's definitely something to look at, and I think as part of whatever review it isn't necessarily the working group review, there are clearly some entry points that you could argue need to be moved around slightly, because as we all know, if you're driving down a road, motorists driving down the road, they'll see a speed limit ahead and then start either not slowing down quickly enough or speeding up before they see it. So those sort of questions arise. But quite, and just on a final point, given that things might be moving around quite quickly, that is something we have to be careful from a safety viewpoint, because without wishing to sound overly, formalistic about this, regular change, of course, can cause confusion. So, the last thing I would want to see is people get used to a change, then you make another change and then another change, and then that's when accidents occur. We see it across the county, we see it across the country. So it is just staging that at the right point to ensure that people, once things settle down, I don't mean the current scheme settles down, and once the final landing point settles down, people know that when they drive along, which way they're going to turn, they're not going to get any nasty surprises. So I think that's probably the best way of looking at it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Anybody else before I sum up and move on? Oh, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you. Just very quickly, just to follow on from what Mr. Baker was saying, he and I sat in on a review of a separate process at KCC, but that was where Kent Police attended and they were giving us their thoughts about speed limit changes. And Mr. Baker has articulated most of that, but the point I just wanted to add is that they said that they wouldn't do any enforcement action ordinarily within the first 6 months of the change as well. So whilst Mr. Baker is also correct about saying it would need to be self-enforcing, because Kent Police don't generally have the resources to be allocating, kind of speeding and what have you, as has been alluded, there are community speed watch teams and other ways of doing this, but just to say that the message that we had back from Kent Police is that they wouldn't do anything in the first 6 months. So I think that is also worth noting, given where we are in the process of this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I will now draw this to a close, and again, like to echo our thanks for everybody who's come to speak tonight and everyone who's come to hear them listen, and particularly the thanks for the way that everyone's conducted themselves and listened thoroughly to the conversations. Now, as has been noted by Mr. Baker, I suspect the minutes from this meeting will be taken forward to the working group, so any of the ideas mentioned this evening should be considered at their next meeting, which I think is useful. And I just wanted to, I think there are a couple of points I wanted to address personally on this, and one of those that I think a couple of speakers mentioned was how we got to this situation in the first place and have lessons been learned. The process for getting to the Plaza project happening was fairly long and tortuous, and I think we're already investigating what happened there. Some of the decision-making processes were delayed by COVID. I understand it was due to be discussed at the Herne Bay Forum, which is now no longer a forum, but that meeting was postponed by the first lockdown. It was part of a Canterbury City Council budget setting measure several years ago, then moved on to an active travel scheme. It does appear that the process by which we leave ourselves open to hear what the general public have to say on these issues was not followed for a number of reasons, partly due to the process of the decision making and partly due to the COVID lockdowns. That is a significant lesson to learn, because we get ourselves into this situation when we don't listen enough and we don't listen to local residents about what the scheme is going to look like. We end up with a lot of people who are very upset with the scheme and people having to give up their Tuesday nights to come to the Guildhall and tell us about it. We, as the representatives on this board this evening and those that will carry on to do it, have a job to do now. We need to show that we've listened and we need to show that we will take action on it. Now, the scheme may change. I have faith that the working group will have long and detailed discussions, but the job of us here now is to make sure that we've listened to the people this evening, that will reflect their specific concerns, but the more general concerns, because as has been noted, there are some elements that are taking matters into their own hands. I'm very proud that the people who've come tonight are not those people, that they are following this process. So we have a really important job to show that the process works, and that when people come up and they speak and they listen to they talk to their representatives, that we represent them and then we make the changes they request wherever possible. So thank you everybody for speaking, everybody who spoke on this issue. I will ask that the working group refers back to JTB at some point, but I thoroughly expect that by the time we hear about this again, that it will be the report of the decision of that working group and that some action will be well in hand by that point, whatever that may be. So thank you, everybody. We will now have a short adjournment to allow those who don't want to sit through the annual parking review to leave the premises. Thank you. We will still be live streaming during this adjournment, though, so you might want to be careful about what you say. Do you have to note my general sense? Oh, just before.
The report was noted, so yeah,
But-
people.
The report was noted. Could we just for formality's sake, say that the report has been noted by general assent? Thank you. We will now adjourn. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The second half of the performance will begin shortly. Right. What I'd like to do, if the board is happy, is item 9 on your agenda is the active travel update, and we've just had an hour on active travel, and I'm assured that there are no further active travel updates. So if you are happy to move item 9 and then strike item 9, then the officer can go home. Agreed? It's always one, isn't there?
Well,
Ms.
I
Dawkins.
could have just asked Mr. Watson out of this, but I was just wondering if you have yet a road safety audit date yet for Longport. You knew I was going to say that, didn't you?
Yeah, thank you. We've instructed the road safety audit to be undertaken. We haven't had the report back yet. That's the latest news.
So no news.
No specific news on what the report says, no.
Oh, so the report's been made, but you haven't had...
No, I haven't seen the report yet.
Oh, but they've been down there and done the audit, but you haven't seen the report.
I can't answer whether they've actually done the audit yet, sorry.
Oh, right, okay. Okay, so do we know why there's such a delay? Because it has been about quite a while now. Do we know why there is such a delay?
Chair, what we tend to do is to let things settle down a little bit before instructing, and it has taken longer than usual. We have instructed Waterman's an external body, external consultancy to undertake the road safety audit. Yeah, that's all I can comment on, I'm afraid. It's not specific on why it's taken a little bit longer, but it has taken longer. I can't comment any further.
Thank you. It will be before May next year, won't it?
I am expecting, sorry, Chair, I am expecting the report imminently. So hopefully I'll have better news for you shortly.
Thank you. In which case, are we happy for item 9, the active travel report, to be noted? Thank you very much, and thank you for your time, Jamie. Very well. We now move on to item 7, the draft transport strategy. This is a report to note, and we have a report from the Service Director, Place and Head of Transport and Environment, and Ruth Gowdy, Transportation Team Leader from Canterbury City Council, will introduce the report.
Hello. I wrote a presentation, but we don't have the means to present. So I'm very sorry about that. It's a report only to note, and it introduces the transport strategy, which has gone live for consultation as part of the local plan suite of documents. The transport strategy encompasses a bus strategy and a local cycling walking implementation plan. The transport strategy is it's gone a different direction to the one that we consulted upon 18 months ago that received a lot of objection. This one is bus focused, and we're looking at improvements in bus services, extension of the times that buses would operate, better frequency of buses, potentially better infrastructure for buses, so potentially taking away road space from ordinary traffic lanes and giving that over to buses, and cycling and walking where they fit in as well. And then the transport strategy covers other elements such as increased use of park and ride, removal of some city centre car parking spaces so as to remove some of the encouragement of people to drive, and increasing parking charges and extending resident parking schemes where possible, where there's a demand to do so from the people who would use them. And all of these elements are following national policies and local policies, and that's all set out in the transport strategy that's that's one of the documents. It's got a horizon year of 2040 to match the local plan horizon year. So the more controversial and adventurous schemes might not be required until late on in the plan period, when there will no doubt be other technological advances that will that will complement what we're proposing.
Thank you, Ruth. Would anybody like to speak on the draft transport strategy? I knew there would be at least one. Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little concerned where, I'm first of all encouraged that at least the final piece where they talk about the quality impact upon the rural areas is actually filled in, but unfortunately it seems to be filled in a most bizarre way. So what we've heard is that there will be more city buses, there'll be more park and ride, there'll be a fast bus lane, which goes essentially down the New Dover Road, and stopping at the top and going into the city. There'll be a city hopper service around the city, and then when we look at the write-up for the equality, it says thanks to the frequency of bus travel and improvements, which will be a benefit to people living in the rural areas. Now, none of these buses actually really will be serving the rural areas. There's no certainty of that. There's not even a promise of any bus services very much after 10 o'clock. So if you come into the city for 10 o'clock, you have to get home. Parking charges will be increased hugely for those in the rural areas who have to come into the city because there's no buses, no convenient buses. I defy, if members think this is nonsense, I defy you to, I invite you to actually come to this meeting by bus and then go home by bus. It's very difficult. And I think the equality thing really, which claims that the people in the rural area will benefit from this, I think is I think to be proved. And it'd be nice if the equality statement was to be written extracting the increase in the bus services solely within the city and then reviewed, I think. Certainly, if you operate within well-served villages, say from Bridge or from Littlebourne or such like, from Wingham, then there may well be a regular bus. But even ever so slightly off that, even those areas, there's an hourly bus service only is promised. This is for 2040, so we're not moving at great pace here. But if you actually live, let's say, for example, Patricksbourne, which is a couple of miles out of a well-served area, I'm afraid you cannot come into, for example, see a show in the city and be sure of getting home after the show by bus, even in the year 2040. So I think the equality statement is at best, I would say, misleading as it's written, and I think it would be better if the extra bus services within the city was taken, and then the situation regarding bus travel in the rural areas is looked at again. If we are being forced to use our cars much less, then I think we have to be entirely fair, entirely honest as regards the bus service that we will see in the year 2040. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. If I wear two hats, and actually we've just amended some of the standing orders. If the chair of Joint Transportation Board needs to liaise with the cabinet member responsible for transport on Canterbury City Council, I don't have to liaise with myself. But if I can switch my hat to cabinet member responsible for this strategy, I agree that the current situation for the rural areas is appalling in terms of bus transportation, and this strategy is very much a first step to improving that. There are lots of elements within the strategy that are designed to improve the ability for people in rural areas to come into the city, both through car to the park and ride. Park and ride use is a benefit to those in rural areas. The three around Canterbury City and the fact that they will be held down in prices is considered to be a benefit for those in rural areas. The bus services have been slashed and slashed again. A lot of this is not within the remit of Canterbury City Council, and this is Canterbury City Council setting a strategy to try and encourage those that we can influence to consider bus travel and active travel more widely for those in the villages. In terms of discouraging car use, this isn't an anti-car strategy. This is a strategy designed to try and encourage alternative forms of transport where possible and not enforce people off the roads. And as you say, a lot of those measures that you talk about will be sometime in the future. So over that period of time, I hope that the national situation will change, and perhaps even the slightly wider local situation will change to improve the amount of bus travel and active travel available, so that situation doesn't improve. I think from the state we find ourselves in now, this strategy does go a long way to improving the lot for those in rural areas for public transport use. So I have next Mr. Watkins.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few questions, some of which actually, or one of which I think you can answer, and then probably the rest more for the officers. I mean, like my general thinking is that I like the principle of the transport strategy, and that you know I like cycling and walking and public transport. I just think some of the major issues with it seem very unrealistic, and if that is borne out by reality, I think you're going to end up with horrendous gridlock. So let me just explain that, a couple more points. The bus industry is on its knees, and although some of that is short-term factors like COVID, we are now a couple of years out of COVID, we still haven't recovered full bus patronage. Some of these things aren't going back in their box, and the bus industry is going to be on its knees for several years. So relying on buses to miraculously double their modal shift, I think is the number, is just very optimistic. Although I wish it would happen. And this is someone who's a bus proponent. I just hand on heart do not think it will. The other thing is halving the capacity on the ring road by closing, the essentially dual carriageway and making it one lane in each direction. Where does all that traffic go? It seems, again, very optimistic that the city will be able to cope. But of course, what we need is some proper data. So my first question is, will there be another stage in this process where you will actually come back to this board with the KCC transport modelling, which is not in the local transport strategy? Maybe it comes in the next iteration, but I remember when we were talking about the last local plan, we did that and we had quite a thorough discussion. I think it was Alan from KCC came here, and we need to see that, because the local transport plan at the moment basically misses out cars. It doesn't say what the congestion is on the roads. I mean, it's absolutely critical. I mean, you've seen just what's happened in Herne Bay, right, where motorists are not happy. Now imagine that writ large. So if you can answer that would be good. A couple of other points. I noticed you're relying on bus service improvement plan money in part to fund some of the improvements to bus services, but some of that money will have gone. Indeed, actually, you start spending that after all of the BSIP has gone, because BSIP is only guaranteed through to 2025. Yet you're saying we're going to spend it in future years. Well, unless the next government renews that policy, there will be no money. So, I mean, that's a pretty major thing, because of course that's millions of pounds to KCC. Question on the steering group. I just want to check, is that part of the kind of new institutional infrastructure we have created from the Kent Enhanced Bus Partnership. So I was the chair of that for a couple of years. Is it that kind of, institution, if you want to call it that, or is this a new thing we've created, the steering group, just for the local plan process? If it's a new thing we've created just for local plan, I thought that sounded quite duplicative with what's already there. Is there an analysis of the cost versus the total transport funding from the new development? So in the strategy, we say we're going to have park and ride, we're going to have park and bus, we're going to have electric bikes, we're going to have a huge amount spent on buses. Has someone actually done the maths to say, well, building all these houses, there's all of this surplus that comes out from delivering houses, and that can cover buses, but etc. And actually, let's be honest, do we have to take so much from that to fund the transport strategy that will have less affordable housing, which would be a kind of compromise? Now, we obviously don't want to do that, but let's just be honest about what the numbers tell us on that. We had to go through the same exercise for the last local plan. And finally, would all the new bus services be run by Stagecoach and the other private operator, or are you actually thinking that Canterbury City Council would commission some of these bus services directly, as you do for Park and Ride? I appreciate there's lots in there in my question, but I'm not sure there's any other forum in which I can kind of have the discussion. Thank you.
I'll ask Ruth to respond on the specific points.
Yeah, and that was the point of bringing the strategy, so that you could ask those questions in this forum. I won't necessarily do them in the same order that you said them. The modelling, in an ideal world, the modelling would have been ready in time for the strategy. What actually happened was that the strategy changed, and we had a really short period of time in order to produce the new transport strategy, and the modelling is still being carried out by Kent's consultants, Jacobs, and it will be ready for at the moment, this is regulation 18 of the local plan deposit documents, and the modelling will be ready for regulation 19, which is when we have considered all of the comments that people have said on this consultation, and we're ready to kind of come forward with exactly the proposals that are going into the local plan. So the modelling will be ready for that. All of the costs of everything that is in the transport strategy, including the cycling and the walking and all of that stuff, is set out in the infrastructure delivery plan, which is a supplementary document to the local plan and is on consultation as part of that. And everything is funded. And it doesn't actually rely on BSIP at all. However, if that's bus service improvement plan, is that about right? Yeah. That's the bus service improvement plan, which is a county council strategic document that they're working through, where they set out what they think should be bus services across the whole county. We would like to tap in to some BSIP money if it's available, and I am actually that's a different thing that I'm working on at the moment. But we've added up the cost of all of the measures that we've put in that transport strategy and balanced it against potential funding that can come from the developments that are proposed in the local plan. I agree with you that if you take out all of the capacity from all of the ring road all in one go and don't reduce any of the car traffic, then yeah, absolute chaos immediately. It takes a leap of faith to picture that it could happen, and yet it could. And people aren't going to be persuaded that going by bus and by cycle and is better than driving a car if it isn't better. So make it better by taking out some of that capacity and giving it over to these sustainable forms of transport. The modelling that we're doing at the moment will take out some of the vehicles. We've got to work with Jacobs and to figure out how many people will be persuaded to switch modes and take that volume of traffic out of the volume of traffic that's currently there, and see what we're left with, and then see what that does to the junctions. Obviously it would happen really gradually, because it's not physically possible to do all of it in one go anyway. So it would happen very, very gradually. And there are parts of the ring road where we go down from single lane to dual lane and then back to single lane again. And Tortel Road is a really good example of that. It's got single lane approaches in both directions. It doesn't stop it from being congested just because it's dual carriageway. If you took out one of those lanes in each direction, it wouldn't necessarily make anything necessarily worse, because the traffic's constrained on its way in both directions, on both approaches. What I propose that we should do, and this is also costed within the infrastructure delivery plan, is that we should have some continuous monitoring of traffic, so that we can actually see whether any of the improvements that we're proposing make a difference. So if we start with increasing the number of bus services, the frequency and the sort of the time extents of them, and a hopper service around the city, if we do those things and see what difference that makes, and then see whether or not these changes in infrastructure on the ground are required, then we'll be able to see how we can go forward with that. The bus strategy proposes that there should be a steering group. We've already got a steering group, which is used to be the Quality Bus Partnership, and it's now called the Local Bus Focus Group, which I chair this district of, but Kent County Council officers and members sit on that as well. So that would be that's easy because it's already there. That would be the steering group. We haven't gone as far as who should be the operators. If it's an extension of existing routes, it makes sense that it's Stagecoach. And that's the way that services already are delivered, that they're primed by a developer. If they want Stagecoach to extend their existing service to come into their development, Hillborough is one I was talking to the developers of Hillborough this morning. They're paying for Stagecoach to extend their service into the development once they've got sufficient infrastructure in place. So it makes sense that that would be Stagecoach. If we want to commission a completely additional route, like a hopper route, then we can go out to tender and see who gets it. We went out to tender for the Park and Ride, Stagecoach got it. So there is, it kind of makes sense if it overlaps like that, but it doesn't have to. There's a completely deregulated bus bus world out there, and anybody can set up that route. Don't know where I got to now down the list. Sorry.
One follow-up point, if I may. Thank you for the points. I mean, yeah, there's a leap of faith in here, and clearly that needs further debate. But there's not enough information to have that debate tonight. That's fine. But I suppose on that point, I would ask the chair, given how critical the car modelling is for speeds and congestion, and remember it was quite a big part of the last local plan, which we all discussed, and we did, I think, in the last administration, put that into our section 18. And given that work is almost done from the sounds of things, and section 18 regulation consultation is going to go on for months and months, would it not make sense to try and get that out into the public domain to start getting some feedback on it? And then that can influence what goes out as, frankly, the final consultation, right, for section 19, and then it becomes a done deal. So to me, it seems too late just to wait for section 19. Is there a way we can get that into public domain? I mean, even if you say you can't formally put it into the local plan consultation, which you've already launched for some, procedural reason, I mean, we should be able to discuss it here at a future JTB. It just seems too big a deal to just leave to what is quite late on in the quite late on in the process. So we'd have to answer that definitively tonight, but I think that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think we can say as and when more information comes to light, then we can see whether we can bring it to the agenda of this board as well. But I think significantly, I think the point should be made with discussing the transport strategy tonight. That is part of the whole local plan consultation. So a lot of what you're saying is what we don't have here is all of the elements within the transportation strategy that's been presented tonight. That is part of the local plan consultation. Those documents are available and the consultation is currently live. The conversations that we have in this meeting this evening will obviously feed into that as well, as we've seen on the previous item. I'll move on before addressing any sort of specific points. We have a couple of speakers. I've got Mr. Thomas, followed by Mr. Brady, followed by Councillor Thomas, followed by Mr. Baker. So, Mr. Thomas, please.
Thank you very much. Well, firstly, the answers we've heard has been incredibly helpful already. But the question I was going to ask is a kind of follow-on from the points that have already been made about physical infrastructure and financial resources required. It was just to make the point or get an understanding about the human resources in this process, because clearly at the moment it's been well articulated about the challenges of the number of buses and the services that we have in the district already. And I'm sure I've mentioned in this forum a number of times about Charlton doesn't have buses after 6 p.m, weekends, bank holidays. And if I've understood the strategy correctly, you want to extend it to 10 p.m. into the evening. So there needs to be a number of buses and indeed a number of bus drivers to drive those buses. The point I was going to make is that currently we have a number of services that are cancelled because Stagecoach don't have enough drivers to provide the services that are currently planned. So clearly there needs to be an expansion in terms of the workforce to deliver this particular programme. So I'm just keen to try and get an understanding, and appreciate maybe it's too early in the process, but how many additional workers we actually need to deliver this plan, and if indeed the process for the City Council to support that process, because it's all very well saying, here's the money, but you physically need drivers to drive the buses. So just be helpful to understand by 2040 how many additional drivers are going to be needed to deliver this process. And I appreciate the number might not be known at this stage, but just to kind of make that point, it's not just about the infrastructure, the resources, but actually the human resources. Thank you.
I think that's a very good point. I understand there have been some positive moves from Stagecoach in terms of their driver recruitment as well. But of course, the nature of this is that as the City Council, we won't be employing and training bus drivers, and that's very much up to the bus companies to sort out their resourcing and match to the contracts that are agreed. So, but I think it is a very solid point in terms of bus drivers. Yeah.
Can I just come back on that? The point is, I assume that the planning inspector is going to have to understand the deliverability of this local plan and transport strategy. So being able to clearly articulate how we're going to deliver this will be important. So understanding whether it's a city council, having bus companies or whatever route you decide to go down, clearly it's got to be deliverable. Otherwise, the planning inspector will presumably ask you to go back to the drawing board, which is probably the last thing anyone wants, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As we're at the consultation stage, I'm not going to be giving my opinion for or against, because after the consultation, I don't want to be accused of predetermination. But taking my urban KCC hat off and putting my city councillor ward hat on, during the election, it was very clear that residents in villages are under-serviced by public transport. So this looks like a strategy to address that. And from the consultation, it will be viewed whether that looks to be on the right track, and that's only right and proper. You can't really make changes and make things better without making changes within the strategy looking to make things better. If we look through the prism of today, we know that the villages are under, the connectivity to villages is shocking. We know that today. But if we don't look to make it better and change it, it's going to be like that continuously. So that's what I think within this strategy is trying to do. We can't go, that's bad, so we shouldn't try to change it. It's bad, so we are looking to.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, Mr. Thomas has taken most of my thunder, to be honest with you. I mean, I can see the Herne Bay bus depot that feeds the buses into Canterbury from my bedroom window. How boring is that? Now, that said, from 7 o'clock, the actual car park is empty, which says to me there is no bus drivers. So coming back to Councillor Thomas' problem, that's it. So, and when we've had the stage, we had hopper buses in Herne Bay years ago, and I have to listen to parents because I was a teenager at the time. They said, brilliant, it works brilliantly. You jump on it, I think it was £1 a pop or something like that. It's, worked brilliantly. And then a bigger company went in, which I can't mention the name of, which is on here, that they bought a load of hopper buses and basically put them out of business. So it destroyed a little lucrative market into there. I am a little bit concerned, I suppose, because you can, if you end up with smaller hopper buses, you may not need, there's a certain size bus that you don't need a PSV for, which means you do not have qualified bus drivers driving the buses. So I'd hope we don't go down that route of not qualified PSV drivers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and absolutely, we'll note those points and feed those in. Mr. Baker.
Thank you. I mean, people sometimes ask me what keeps me awake at night. And to be honest, the truthful answer is a geriatric 15-year-old Pomeranian. But if we were talking about things involved in my remit at the Cabinet, the first one would be the upcoming new entry-exit system for the EU and the impact that's going to have on Kent. The second one is the state of the bus industry from the cliff edge that we've got in March 2025. Because without knowing future funding, given the fact we've got a change of government coming up, given all of these things, everything is so unclear. But that is not a reason not to have a strategy in place, because if you try to devise a strategy for very short-term stuff, you never would. And Mr. Brody is quite right. You've got to be aspirational enough to think things aren't working at the moment. What do we want them to be like? What can we put down that works towards getting us there? I absolutely agree with that. And I just would say in broad terms, this transport strategy is being looked at by a lot more eyes than just those interested in Canterbury directly. Because whatever the government of the day may say, whatever new guidance they may issue, whatever the latest rabbit they attempt to pull out of a hat about being pro-driver suggests, the underpinning legislation makes it quite clear, and it won't change whatever the government changes. The future of easing congestion isn't about building new roads or wider roads. It's about changing people's habits of how they get from A to B. And I think we just have to accept that. And it's absolutely clear, because if you look at what is the Bible document, as it were, the National Planning Policy Framework, Section 115 makes quite clear that the government no longer really care about congestion getting worse or being bad, unless there is a severe impact on the highway network. Interestingly, lots of highways authorities, including Kent repeatedly, have begged the government, please tell us what you mean by severe. They've never told us. And yet constantly planning inspectors have pretty much decided that severe is a barrier that's impossible to hit. And you think of somewhere like Canterbury, which has already got massive congestion, how actually can you make the congestion much worse? So on that level, you have to look at these alternatives. And I think that's what this plan is doing. And I take what Ms. Gowdy has said about this is 2040. And almost, without wishing to open an old can of worms, as the previous transport strategy suggested, yes, there may be things in here that people can't picture at the moment, or may even consider unpalatable at the moment, but you're not going to go from 0 to 70 overnight. And by making the changes in this gradual manner, by the time you get to near 2040, you might not need to make those final changes at all, because things have already changed dramatically. Clearly, lots of work has to happen. Mr. Watkins is quite right. Modelling is going to be key on this. Canterbury is also in that situation where, I was a Canterbury City Councillor for 12 years, no secret. The finances of this authority rely quite heavily on city centre car parking. You're talking 7-8 million net income, a third of the income the council gets. That's severe, not a reason not to do something. But just on this final broad brush point, one thing that jumped out at me, because it's something I think I mentioned years ago, and everyone back then pretty much said that's never going to happen. It's this aspirational point about using park and ride hubs for deliveries, for delivery hubs, and having the final mile, call it what you will, being done in a far more sustainable manner, be it e-bikes and whatever. And we even mentioned in this transport strategy, which I think is great, the potential for using drones for that final mile. This is exactly the sort of thing a document looking to 2040 needs to look at. And I'm glad that it's in writing, Because when we look at designing new developments and things like that, you need to start thinking how our delivery is going to get there. At the moment, delivery vehicles park on pavements and wreck them. We need to look beyond that. I was in Ebbsfleet Garden City last week. The advantage they've got is they're building from scratch, and they can bring things in that work now. What's always going to be a nightmare in almost anywhere, but Canterbury in particular, we're trying to retrofit into what is an incredibly old location with all of those challenges. I believe it can be done. And I think the thread running through this transport strategy, as many hurdles as it has to overcome, as many times where something might go wrong and things fall apart, it's actually being honest with people about how this is actually about changing habits, not making it easier for everyone to go exactly where they want as they do now. And with that being the basis of the conversation that's happening through this consultation, I think that can only be good. So it'd be good to come back, have more of a look at this, but it's certainly food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Councillor Bothwell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering whether I know Ms Goody has said that this is fully funded, but I'm wondering whether the full costs of this policy have been taken into account. I generally welcome the policy altogether. It moves in a very good direction, as Mr Watkins said. But I'm wondering whether there's enough money to do everything that's needed to really achieve modal shift. I don't think it can all come from the developers. I don't think it's reasonable or fair on developers to fund things which we should be doing anyway, whether there's any new development or not. We still need to do these things to persuade people to move out of their cars. So I don't think it can all come down to the developers. I mean, there are connections in footpaths and in cycleways which are missing at the moment. There are speed limits at 30, 40 miles an hour, and I think Kent County Council will have to review their policy on imposing lower speed limits. I don't think we can live with a policy which is driven by you can't lower the speed limit beyond what people will, beyond so many % of what they do already or what they feel comfortable doing. I drive around London very occasionally, not very often, where it's a 20-mile-an-hour limit, and it is very difficult to stay at 20 miles an hour. I know to my cost. So I think with enforcement, you could enforce a 20-mile-an-hour limit, and drivers would be quite uncomfortable doing that because it's quite slow. But if you're going to encourage people to walk around cities, and especially to take to bicycles, etc., you're not going to persuade them to do that if cars are going along at 30 and 40 miles an hour. So we won't achieve that modal shift without that change in speed limits and all these new connections.
It's fully funded because we have to be able to demonstrate to the local plan inspector how we're going to pay for it. That doesn't mean that there won't be other sources of funding that become available. For example, active travel schemes. I've got 3 active travel schemes for Canterbury to Herne Bay cycle route, extension of the Crab and Winkle, and extension of the Riverside cycle route. They're there in the transport strategy, but they're being funded by, technically they haven't been funded yet, but we have got money to work on them coming from Active Travel England, and they will go forward as bids for funding from Active Travel. And there's money available from Kent County Council bus service improvement plan. There are, and there will be going forward, it's a long time in the future, there will be other pots of funding that are available for specific things like levelling up and other things like that will come forward in the future. But we can't put those down as sources of funding and then present that to the inspector and say that, we're hoping that these sources will come along. We have to prove that it works. We have to prove it's balanced. And so we have proved that we can use developer funding to fund all of this. The previous transport strategy proved that developer funding was going to pay for an enormous ring road on the outskirts of Canterbury, and this is better than that. Easier than that.
I can't possibly comment on whether it's better or not. I'm not allowed to, I don't think. A very, very short point from Mr. Brady, and then we'll close this one.
Very briefly, this isn't just simply a Canterbury City Council strategy. I've come with a prop, and I need to remind county councillors that emerging local transport plan, turning the curve towards net zero, policy 8, a growing public transport system supported by dedicated infrastructure to attract increased ridership, helping operators to invest in and provide better services. It's a KCC policy. It's just aligning with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. And I think we've had some very positive comments tonight, and I'd continue to encourage people to do that. And of course, should you be a resident of the Canterbury district, to respond to the consultation in full, as I'm sure I think all of us are actually. The action is for us to note. I'd like to thank Ruth for presenting the report this evening, and I suspect we will continue to hear more about the transport strategy. It moves forward through the consultation at the next meeting. Now, moving swiftly on to item 8, the annual parking review. I will change the process slightly in a minute, but just this is to consider the report from the Head of Transport and Environment, and in a moment I will invite Richard Jenkins, Senior Transportation Officer, to make his remarks. The way we'll take this, for those of us who haven't been involved in this before, is where a board member wishes to speak against the officer's recommendation on an item, or there is a public speaker registered to speak on an item, then we will debate that item and vote on that individually. Where there is no speaker and no board member wants to speak on an item, and the officer's recommendation is will go through, then we can approve that one on general assent. We have a lot to go through, and I will take them all individually. However, we have one public speaker on this, and he's been waiting very patiently through a very, very long meeting. So with the board's indulgence, can we invite, I've lost the page, Mr. Hammond to come and speak on, it is, for those of you following at home, 4900, the Ridgeway Cliff item. And the officer recommendation, that is no action. Mr. Hammond.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name is Ken Hammond. I live at 36 Ridgeway Cliff, and I'm actually covering two proposals. The first one is 3480, which I came here last year and put up a petition. And that petition, well, I went to 44 properties in my area. I've got 64 signatures and a bus driver. I've got 65 signatures against the proposal. I had two people who were 50-50, and there was also the person I did not contact. He was the person that contacted the local council without us knowing, who come up with these proposals. We never knew about these proposals until it hit the lamppost, and we then had to discuss it. I think that's why I did the petition. Mr. Peter Harding saw my petition. It was discussed, and it decided that there would be a review on it. So we had the review, and so there was the original one, and we now had the review. The original one, this is a little green area at the end of my area, which is fenced off. There's a bus stop on one side of Broadway, and they wanted to put red lines where the bus stop was, some red lines around the corners, and then proposed area where from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock per day you could not park. And then down the other side of the road was red lines where you couldn't park, and again the 9 to 10. That was I put down to review, and the review's come back, and what we have now is there is no markings at all where the bus is, and all we have now is double yellow lines around the back of this green, and then on the roads opposite we have some red lines, and then we have some proposals where they now want to make it worse. They want to put no parking now from 8 o'clock to 6:30, 6 days a week, from Monday to Saturday. I've lived in this area for 11 years. We have no problems. This part of Hampton is a backwater of Herne Bay, and I've said I've lived here for 11 years. We don't have any parking or traffic flow problems in the area. It's good that the trade people can come and go as they want. We have people that have carers, and we've got people that come along and have their family for parties, and there's no problem with parking. So we hear the problems the council is having with cutting costs and the hard discussions that they're having to make. So please don't waste any more money, time and money on this proposal. Make us happy and please vote against these proposals. Please send the money where it will do more good. Thank you, councillors. I've read my case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Hammond, and thank you for waiting so patiently to have your say. Also, Councillor Thomas, would you like to speak to this issue? What we'll do is we'll take this one individually. Councillor Thomas will speak, and then Rich will address this one individually, and then we'll move on to the general report and take the rest.
Okay, this did come to JTB last year, and I, along with Andrew Cook at the time, who was the local councillor at the time, we did go to every resident in that street from 12 to 13 to 12. So we spoke to about 5 or 6 residents that actually live in the street in that end. Where I am at now, I think the compromise for this could be that we have the double yellow lines round the triangle part of the actual, if that makes sense, yeah, on the triangle. And there's no reason why, if we're going to do double yellow lines, we have double yellow lines on the corners, because that's, you're not allowed to park on the corners anyway. And if we were where the blue line comes on, where on the side, and I don't know if it's left or right, as you look at it, it's on the right hand side. The possible compromise is there's a single yellow line that operates from, I think it's 11 till 12, because in that area we do have restrictions of parking from 11 till 12 in certain areas. So if you've got a traffic warden coming up there, they can check both areas. That's what kind of makes sense. That's the kind of proposal I would put forward at the moment.
Rich, would you respond to this specific issue? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, it is possible. We went out to consultation on the original proposal, or this year's proposal, and we had a lot. I think we had 15 objections to the proposal, and that's why we're proposing that we don't go ahead. If there is a compromise and the board feels there should be a reduced scheme, if the restriction is less restrictive than what went to consultation, then that is something that the board could decide to do. The only thing I would say is that on the plan, if anybody's looking at the plan, it's a shame we can't put the plans on the screens, but there we are. Where we have got a red line indicating a double yellow line, and then a blue line for the single yellow line, the one thing we can't do is change a single yellow line to a double yellow line, because that is more restrictive, and we would have to go back to consultation for that. But if it's felt by the board that this would work, if we reduce the hours that the single yellow line would apply and reduce the length, that's for the board to decide.
Thank you, Mr Brady.
Thank you, Chair. I'm slightly uncomfortable to make make changes without then understanding the opinion of residents. I think there's pretty dangerous grounds to make changes kind of on the fly. Maybe a suggestion would be to have a mini residents group to work with officers to find an alternative that is best for everybody, to then bring it back. And I don't know, there will be obviously a delay, and then it doesn't look like we're just ignoring 15 objections to alter it slightly, because there might be 15 objections again. So that would be a suggestion, is to try and get the opinion of residents on that alteration. Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I actually know this little spot of backwater of Hampton, as you described it. I can't see why it's necessary here. I deliver meals for Age UK. I park up. You know, I know where I also park on double yellow lines a lot because a lot of people who are elderly live in places where you can't actually access. But I just don't see the point in it. I just don't think it's a big issue.
Councillor House.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Smith. I know the area really well. I have never seen an issue there at all in this area. And I would suggest we go with officer recommendation and just don't do anything. Yeah, that's what I would do.
To be clear, the officer recommendation is that we don't implement anything on this scheme. Shall we take a vote? And we have to do it by roll. Oh, roll call. You can't general assent once there's been discussion, unfortunately. So please bear that in mind as we go through the other 800 items. Would we like to do it by a show of hands?
Everyone has to be in agreement. Is anyone against the recommendation? You're against. Okay, we'll do a roll call then.
Okay. So to be clear, we shall now vote. A vote for is to go with the officer recommendation, which is to take no action or not to implement. A vote against is to, what would it be? To implement the scheme, I suppose. Yeah. Take it away.
Mr. Baker. Sorry, could I get you to use your mics, please? I can't hear very well.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Bland.
4.
Councillor Bothwell.
4.
Mr. Brady.
4.
Councillor Buckman.
4.
Mr. Dance.
4.
Ms. Dawkins.
4.
Councillor Howes.
4.
Councillor Moses.
4.
Councillor Ricketts.
4.
Councillor Naomi Smith.
4.
Mr. Soul.
4.
Councillor Thomas.
Against, please.
Mr. Thomas.
4.
And Mr. Watkins.
Abstain.
Thank you. That's 12 for, 1 against, 2 abstentions. No action.
Thank you. And thank you very much for coming to speak this evening. We shall now move on to the substantive item for the entire piece. And I will go through each individual item themselves and where the... Oh. Apologies. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, if we can proceed on to the first one, we have no more public speakers on any of these items. A couple of councillors have asked to speak on these. A couple of board members have asked to speak as well. So we shall go on to the Canterbury proposals. Number 300, Nackington Road. The officer recommendation is no action. Can we agree this by general assent? Lovely. I thought you were going to speak then. You had me worried. Not on the first one. Number 620, Castle Street. The officer recommendation is to implement. We have no speakers requested. Can we take this by general assent? Should we do it by show of hands on general assent or just by a nod?
I would suggest we just come back. If there are no comments, we'll just do one. Right.
Okay, we don't need to show hands for general assent. We can just nod. If you don't want to take it by general assent, wave at me and we'll speak and vote.
Chair, can I just clarify that all of my general assent will be abstention percent?
Okay.
You may have caused us some issues here. Hold on.
Yeah, just go home.
Is it easier if I leave?
Yeah.
do them individually.
Okay. What we'll do is we'll go through it, and rather than by saying taking them individually as general assent, I will read them and ask if anybody wishes to speak. If you do not wish to speak on the item, then we will save those items to the end and take those on block so we can vote. Anybody who wishes to speak, we will take those items individually and vote individually on them. So,
I didn't quite understand what you meant, but I wanted to speak on one of the items in the case.
yes, we will
Yeah.
stop
Okay,
when we
right,
get to
right,
that
right.
point. When you hear the item you want to speak on,
Got ya.
wave at
Right.
me, although I do have your name already noted, and it's going to happen really soon.
I can't wait.
Would anybody like to speak on number 650, Roper Road? The officer recommendation is no action. Lovely. Would anybody like to speak on item 690, Merchants Way? The officer recommendation is to implement.
I need to abstain on 650, by the way.
660, apologies, 660 40 Acres Road. The
No, no, I need to abstain on 650 Roper Road, the one that you just,
This is going really well so far.
as I mentioned previously.
So do we have to have an individual vote if there's an abstention? Okay, well, we'll take that one at the end. Well, no, because you can't vote on block if you only want to abstain on one.
We can do it by show of hands.
Do it by show of hands. Okay. Sorry, just the issue in terms of abstaining or voting for, we can't do by Okay, so abstention counts as speaking for the points of for the point of this one. So we'll have to take a vote by show of hands on number 650 Roper Road. The officer recommendation is no action. So those for the officer recommendation, please raise your hand to vote for. Those against, please raise your hand to vote against. And those who would like to abstain, please raise your hand. Thank you. Item number 660, 40 Acres Road. Would anybody like to speak on this one? Okay. Item number 690, Merchants Way. I believe Ms Dawkins would like to speak on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just, yeah, this has been here before, hasn't it? This Merchants Way. And I just feel sort of in a difficult position because I don't want to support it tonight, but then I don't want to support all the reasons for the objections either. I want to kind of try and find a solution. And I haven't come with, I kind of noted one little one just now, but there is an issue up there, yes, with the people parking their pavements. There is the issue that it blocks the pavement so people can't get past with their pushchairs. But there's also the issue that there aren't enough places for people to park. And I don't know, by putting the ban there, it just means where are these cars going to, where are people going to park? It's not enough road width to put 2 rows of cars there. So they're kind of forcing the pavement. I know there's a shop up there. I mean, and there's also a garage as well that I think is using some of those spaces for their cars, which is an issue as well. Some of the comments, if you read some of the comments, there's also the issue that if you do want to try and, you know, you have a house up there and you want to try and find a solution to your parking problem, you would get a drive. But then if you look through the comments, it's going to be costing you about £5,000 to do, to put that crossover in. And I know that because I've had residents contact me and also the ward councillor, Pip Hazelton as well, about doing a sort of club together of residents coming together and sort of doing a pool so they can all get their drives done at the same time and then reduce the cost because it's going to be the same tradesperson and stuff like that. But that wasn't allowed to happen for some reason. There has been an issue with CCC and KCC getting these drives rolled out, I had one resident who's taken, it took him about 2.5 years to get a drive because they said, I think Canterbury City Council wanted to do some, they were doing some shift around with the way the process or something, it was taking a long time. So, you know, that's not easy for any resident to do that either. So there doesn't seem to be a credible alternative for them, you know, and until there is, I don't feel like it's fair to to put that ban in fully. However, looking at the map, are you right there? Yeah, are you going like that?
So do you have an alternative proposal or just not to implement?
I'm getting to that. Okay, the suspense. Yeah. Okay, so if you look at the square, yeah, you put the parking ban there, and that is totally reasonable to do because a lot of people are parking on the actual grass. Then you've got the shop a bit further along. So what I'm proposing is that we put the parking ban sort of on half the road from the square up to sort of a few houses up where the shop is, and then see how that goes. Because there's going to be more cars around that area because the shop's around there. Hold on. It's Merchant's Race. Yeah, the shop is the Pilgrim store. Yeah, it's just no. It's on the red bit. Yeah, the shop is. Shall I show you? But yeah, okay. So that's one thought. If you have any other thoughts, but I just feel that I can't put that through until it just doesn't seem like a fair way to deal with this. Just like put the ban in and then expect everyone to cope when they can't, because for the reasons I've just explained.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I think you summed it up pretty well, that it's a difficult situation and there is no perfect answer. I appreciate totally that it's difficult to park there and what the problems are. Our problem is that as officers, we have to consider the wider picture. The issue with parking on the pavement is that the pavement isn't built to take the weight of cars. And for as long as we allow people to park on the pavement, there's always the risk of damage to underground services and so on, which could cause huge problems.
And wheelchairs.
Sorry?
And wheelchairs getting past them.
Yes. The other issue, as Ruth reminded me, is obstruction of the pavement. So if you've got people who need to have a wider pavement, people with wheelchairs or double buggies, that sort of thing, it also makes access very difficult for them. So generally speaking, our policy is that if we're told that there is a problem with people parking on the pavement who are causing obstruction issues, then generally we will support putting in a ban. So really it's a decision, there's a proposal for a reduced length of ban to be considered, but I think as officers our recommendation is still to implement the whole thing.
Councillor Howes.
Thank you. I have a question. It's on this one and also related to 4600, which is Western Avenue, a bit later, where the objection was from a Kent Fire and Rescue Services here, and that was a pavement ban. I just wondered what would the Kent Fire and Rescue Services response to this one, because it's exactly the same issue here, is that there's cars parking because there's not enough space for double parking. So in one area they're saying it's a problem, but here they're happy with it, are they?
Yes, the point about that is that every proposal that we do like this
goes out to public consultation, and the fire brigade are always consulted. They're one of the statutory consultees, and we generally go to Fire HQ and to the local fire stations. If we don't have any objections from them, then we don't generally see it as a problem. If they do pick out a particular proposal and say it would cause them problems, obviously we'd take that very seriously.
Thank you. Ms Dawkins, you want to come back quickly, please?
Yeah, okay. The other problem is up there. I mean, I've done a bit of pothole reporting up there, but the roads are absolutely appalling. They're absolutely appalling up there. And I keep speaking to our KCC engagement person about it. And it's like, oh no, we can't do anything. You know, so it's just such a really bad situation for the residents, because it's like, oh well, so you're going to put a ban on there, but then you're not going to fix the roads either. It's like, come on, you know, which one are you going to do? You know, and I know the roads isn't the CCC problem. You know, we are dealing, the council's dealing with the enforcement, but it would be nice if KCC actually did something about improving the roads up there and fixing those potholes, so that at least if you're not going to park on the pavement, you have a decent road to park on. Another solution could be as well, is putting parking bays in. Is that something that you could consider?
On last point first, anything to do with changing layout of the road and creating parking bays would be an issue for KCC. And given the current level of resources, I think that's unlikely to happen. And as far as the state of the road is concerned, I mean, the same applies. But if we were to encourage people to park on the pavement, then we would be inviting the same sort of damage to occur on the pavement as happened in the road, because it's not designed to take the weight of cars parked on the pavement.
Thank you. Do you have anybody else that would like to speak on this item in particular? In which case we should move to a vote, and this will have to be a roll call vote. A vote for is to go with the officer recommendation to implement the ban on parking on the pavement as shown on the map. A vote against is to not implement the ban on parking on the pavement. Fire away.
Thank you. Mr Baker. Councillor Bland.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Bothwell. Mr Brady.
Abstain.
Councillor Buckman.
Abstain.
Mr Dance.
He's gone. Oh.
He.
We'll wait until he comes back, shall we? I didn't notice Mr Dance had disappeared. We'll get him at the end.
Okay. Ms Dawkins.
I'm abstaining, thank you.
Abstaining. Councillor Howes.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Moses.
Abstain.
Councillor Ricketts.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Smith, Naomi Smith.
Again, reluctantly for.
Mr Sol.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
Thank you. Mr Thomas.
Apologies, it's me. I was just thinking these residents are going to be getting buses till 10 p.m, so I'm for. Thank you.
Mr Watkins.
For.
And Councillor, Mr Dance, sorry. Did you hear the debate on that one? No, so we'll go with that on that one. So that was 9 for, none against, and 5 abstentions.
So the officer recommendation to implement the ban is carried. Right. We shall now proceed for item 850, St Stephen's Hill. The officer recommendation is to implement. We have no one listed to speak. Would anyone like to speak on that item? Number 870, Manwood Avenue. The officer recommendation here is to amend and implement. Do you want to speak to that amend and implement on this one, Richard, or should we just move on, assuming people have read the papers? Very well. Would anyone like to speak on this one? Lovely. Item number 1500, Flag Iris Avenue. The officer recommendation is to implement. Would anybody like to speak on this one? Item number 1700, Sturry Road. The officer recommendation is to implement. Would anybody like to speak on this one? Right, we shall go through the rest of these as we go. So we move on to the Herne Bay issues now. Item number 3000, Albion Lane and Norton Avenue. I know there has been, would anybody like to speak on this one? The officer recommendation is to amend and implement. Would anyone like to speak on this? No, lovely. Item number 3125, Gorse Lane. The officer recommendation is to amend and implement. Would anyone like to speak on that? Lovely. Item number 3150, Kingsfield Road and Ellis Way. The officer recommendation is no action. Would anyone like to speak on that? No, lovely. Item number 3170, Mill Lane and Kingsfield Road. The officer recommendation is no action. Would anyone like to speak on that? It's not on my bit of paper.
It's not on my bit of paper.
Hold on a second. You're right, it is on this bit of paper. Item number 3160, Pear Tree Road. The officer recommendation is no action due to objections. Would anyone like to speak on that one? Councillor House.
Yeah. Thank you. When this was put forward, myself and Councillor Jones spent a lot of time meeting with local residents and going up there. And the reason this was put forward is purely health and safety reasons, with vehicles coming in and out of the garage access. It meant that they couldn't actually see the road if they were reversing out, which just made it very difficult with the vehicles parked on the road so tightly. So all they're asking for is an additional sort of half a car's length just to try and stop accidents, and that was it. That was the real reason. Fully understand that there would have been a lot of objections because there's an awful lot of cars parked up there, and the garage sites themselves don't accommodate all the vehicles there. So that's what it was. So it's simply pure health and safety, and that's why I'd like it to be implemented. Thank you.
So are you proposing that it is implemented? Yeah. Thank you. Richard, would you like to?
Yes, I mean, this is where we were looking at a very short length of the extension of the airlines, yeah. But we did get 8 objections to it, which is why we came up with our recommendation. The board may like to decide otherwise.
Would anyone else like to speak to this one? Mr. Saul.
I think it seems a pretty sensible suggestion. I'm happy to support Councillor Howes on this.
Would anyone else like to speak on this, or should we move to a vote? Well, let's move to a vote. A vote for. Actually, hold on a second. If we vote against, that would be to implement the.
Let's vote for what. Do
So-
they want to?
Should we vote for implementing the changes that the officer has
So
recommended
it
not
would
to
be
implement?
amend and implement. Yeah.
So a vote for would be for the officer recommendation. A vote against would be to implement the scheme. That can't. No, we'd have to vote positively for the scheme, I think.
You want to amend and implement, don't you? You want to amend the scheme. Yeah. So that is what the vote would be for.
No, it's not. It's not an amendment, though, is it? It is because the officer recommendation is no action because of the objections.
That's
But
fine.
we.
But we're making a different proposal. So we're proposing instead to amend and implement.
But it would go to the original proposal that we've said no action on, so that would be counted as amend and implement.
But that's not it.
Or just implement.
No.
Sorry.
And without wishing being controversial, if Councillor Howes has made a proposal and Mr. Solar seconded it, surely you're then voting on that proposal.
Quite right. And that proposal is to implement the scheme as listed in the papers. The officer recommendation is to not implement the scheme. So a vote for is to vote for the proposal made by Councillor Howes, seconded by Councillor Sol. A vote against is to vote in favour of the officer recommendation not to implement the scheme. Are we all clear on what we're voting for? A vote for is for Councillor Howes' proposal, seconded by Councillor Sol, to implement the scheme. The officer recommendation was not to implement the scheme. So a vote for is to implement the scheme. And just to be clear, this is item 3160, Pear Tree Road. Right, let's vote.
Mr Baker.
Abstain.
Councillor Bland.
For.
Councillor Bothwell.
For.
Mr Brady.
For.
Councillor Buckman.
For.
Mr Dance.
For.
Ms Dawkins.
Against.
Councillor Howes.
For.
Councillor Moses.
For.
Councillor Ricketts.
Abstain.
Councillor Naomi Smith.
For.
Mr Sol.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
Mr Thomas.
For.
Mr Watkins.
For.
Thank you. That's 12 for, 1 against and 2 abstentions.
There we go. Then Councillor Howes' proposal is upheld and the scheme has been voted to be implemented. Thank you. We shall move on to scheme number 3170, Mill Lane and Kingsfield Road. Would anyone like to speak on this one? I have on 3200 Hillborough Avenue. I believe Councillor Thomas would like to speak on this one, or is that the next one? Cut off on the page. Would anyone like to speak on 3200 Hillborough Avenue? No? In which case, 3300 Reculver Road Parking Bay. Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of the local councillors, the ward councillors. Jeanette Stockley's ill, so she's not able to attend this meeting. They did have a meeting with the transport people up there, and they would like to have this implemented on safety reasons because someone was injured coming out of the pub up there and stuff like that. So it's a safety issue more than anything. So that's why they're looking at implementing this, and it's frustrating that, you know, there's also the garage there, so that's blocking the view and access for people to go to clear view from the highways.
Richard, would you like to respond on this one? Thank you.
Yes, we did look at that. I was at that meeting with Councillor Stockley and Councillor Carnac. We looked at the proposal to remove this parking bay, but when we went out to consultation, we had 6 objections to it, including from people directly affected that didn't want the bay taken away. So therefore, we recommended no action. But I understand where Councillor Thomas is coming from.
Would anybody else like to speak on this one?
Do I need to propose that?
Yes, I would imagine following the process we've already set up,
Yep.
the officer recommendation is no action. So if you would like to propose that the scheme is implemented, you need a seconder for that. Yeah.
I'll second it.
Councillor Howes has seconded, in which case, if no further people wish to speak on it, we shall move to the vote. Just to be clear, sorry, just for the sake of this, a vote for is for Councillor Thomas's recommendation to implement the scheme. A vote against would be for the officer recommendation of no action.
Sorry, Mr Baker. Councillor Bland. Councillor Bothwell.
For.
Mr Brady.
Abstain.
Oh, Councillor Buckman,
Against.
Mr Dance,
For.
Ms Dawkins,
Against?
Councillor Howes,
For.
Councillor Moses,
Against.
Councillor Ricketts,
Abstain.
Councillor Naomi Smith,
Against.
Mr Sol,
For.
Councillor Thomas,
For, please.
Mr Thomas,
For.
Mr Watkins.
Or
Thank you. That's 7 for, 5 against and 3 abstentions.
Thank you. In which case, the board has voted to implement that scheme.
I just realised something else, Chair, because there's actually 3300s, and the other one is also on.
3,400.
There's a 3300. There's two. 3300 and 3300 on my paperwork. One is for a pavement ban in Reculver Road as well.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing, is it?
No,
That's item 3400.
just the numbers are wrong. Yeah. That's 3400, the pavement ban.
Okay. So why is it like that on my paperwork? Okay, thank you.
Very well. No problem. It's there's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of and to be honest, as we've already seen, when it prints over 2 pages, it can cause some confusion. We are now moving on to item 3360, Spencer Road. The officer recommendation is to implement. Does anybody wish to speak on this one? Item number 3400, Reculver Road, PPB. The officer recommendation is to implement. Do we have anyone to speak on this one? Excellent. Item number 3420, Reculver Road, Shops. The officer recommendation is to implement. Would anyone like to speak on this one? Item number 3610, Glenbervie Drive. The officer recommendation is to implement. Would anyone like to speak on this one? Item number 3900, Reculver Drive, amend and implement. Would anyone like to speak on this one? Lovely. Item number 4550, Cecil Park. The officer recommendation is to amend and implement. Would anyone like to speak on this one? Item number 4580, Dolphin Street. The officer recommendation is to implement. I believe Mr. Watkins would like to speak on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a bit of a curiosity. A resident asked me to recommend we put double yellow lines on the junctions of the roads which border Dolphin Street, and for reasons of safety, and that seemed sensible. And I'd seen a few cars parked wrongly on those junctions. Well, I suppose actually at the moment they're allowed to park on those junctions, but it's not safe. When I brought that forward, I think Richard Jenkins, I think you said you suggested we just do the whole road, not just the junctions or the bits of the road anyway that didn't already have double yellow lines. So that's what went to consultation, and the residents have come back and said we only support it being on the junctions, which takes us back to what was originally proposed. So I'm just saying, like, let's listen to the residents, which were the ones who asked for this in the first place, and it's supported by residents. If you read the 4 comments against it, let's just have it on the junctions.
Yeah, just one point. We're talking about loading ban rather than double lines in this case.
That's right. It's the blips on the double yellow lines. So you're absolutely right. It's a loading ban. So it would mean no blue badge parking on junctions. Yeah, absolutely right. It's already double yellow. Yeah.
Do you have a proposal, Mr. Watkins?
Yes, simply to to amend it to only have the loading ban on the junctions of Dolphin Road, so with Telford, with High Street and with Central Parade, and not the sections of the road which are not junctions.
Telford Street as well.
Sorry?
Telford Street as well.
And yeah, Telford, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, because it's always the same, isn't it? I mean, I don't know why we don't just uniformly have, you know, these things on corners. Because they're always dangerous if people park there. Yes. Yeah.
Mr. Baker.
Mr. Watkins makes a very good point I was going to make, actually. I think at some point this JCB, it would be useful if you were to have a discussion or indeed make a recommendation that on every junction that has double yellow lines, which in theory should be every junction to match the highway code, also has the blips on the curb to stop loading. The reason I say that is we're putting double yellow lines on all junctions because it isn't a safe place to park. If it's not a safe place to park, it shouldn't be a safe place to park for people with blue badges or not blue badges. So I think realistically, it would be good if this authority, or indeed the county authority, looked at restricting, eliminating as much as possible any form of parking on and around junctions. But that's obviously a bigger discussion than today.
I'm happy just to propose for Dolphin Street on this occasion. I've got smaller ambitions.
Not nationwide. Richard, can you advise if that's possible for us to vote on that?
Yes, I'm happy to go. I mean, if you glance at the plan, there's actually very little difference between what we're proposing and what Mr. Watkins is suggesting. But I'm certainly happy if you want to vote on the proposal, then yes.
So, Mr. Watkins, would you like to propose exactly what you're proposing and then find a seconder?
So I'm proposing no loading ban on the corners where Dolphin Street has a junction with another road.
I'll second that, Chair.
Yeah, it's that. Sorry, I haven't actually got the map right in front of me, but I think does it not include a little bit of just a little bit of the corner off the High Street as well? I believe it does. Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
High Street, Dolphin Street, Central Parade and Telford Street.
Correct.
Very well, in which case a vote for is for Councillor Watkins' proposal to amend and implement, which is with those restrictions. A vote against is to go with the officer recommendation. Could we proceed to the vote?
Mr. Baker. Councillor Bland.
For.
Councillor Bothwell.
For.
Mr. Brady.
Can we note this down? This is for the very first time I've done something for Mr. Watkins' proposal. Let's pop it in the calendar.
Councillor Buckman.
For.
Mr. Dance.
For.
Ms. Dawkins.
For.
Councillor Howes.
For.
Councillor Moses.
For.
Councillor Ricketts.
For.
Councillor Naomi Smith.
For.
Mr. Sol.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For, please.
Mr. Thomas.
For.
Mr. Watkins.
For, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That's 14 for, none against, 1 abstention.
Well, wasn't that lovely? I actually think that's a very good point Mr. Baker makes as well, and maybe that's something that we could look at perhaps discussing at the next JTB and seeing whether we could talk about from a district point of view, having a look at that. I think that's a very good point. That's something that it sounds like a good meaty topic for us to take on as a board, and I can see the officers absolutely hating that idea.
Could I make a point? Could we fix the roads first?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
If at the moment double yellow lines don't need a time plate, that was removed from the regulations about 20 years ago. So now double yellow lines only mean no waiting at any time. They don't have to have a post with a sign on. A loading ban has to have a post with a sign on. So therefore that would be an awful lot of posts with signs on. now that we've taken all of them down over the past 20 years. And really, double yellow lines around a junction mean no parking, and nobody should be parking there. It says in your blue badge that you're exempt for up to 3 hours on yellow lines, provided that you're parked in a safe place, you're not causing an obstruction, and so it ought to be unnecessary.
I think that's a fair point. We shall now move on to 4600 Western Avenue and Pier Avenue. Would anybody like to speak on this one? I should say that the officer recommendation here is no action. Okay. Just checking I'm on. 4670 Sandown Drive. The officer recommendation is no action. Yes, Ms. Dawkins.
I'm just a bit confused with that there's no action.
Which one, sorry?
The 4600, the proposed payment and verge parking ban, that no action. So I thought the premise was that you weren't supposed to have parking on
This is the one Councillor Howes referred to as Kent Fire and
so-
Rescue Service objection.
Yeah, I know you did. So I just wanted to understand why there's no action now on this, something that is exactly the same. You can't be, the premise should be the same for all of them, shall we?
Yes, I mean, as I explained earlier, if the fire brigade tell us that it is going to cause them problems, that overrides everything else.
Thank you. I just needed my. It's been a long night.
Do we want to have a vote on that one, or should we save it for the end? Yeah.
I know it's getting late and we want to all crack on, but this one keeps coming up, and I know the fire brigade will always refuse it. It's something we need to look at, especially enforcement around where the garage is, where the spray garage place is. I'll email you and go that route. Thank you.
Should we proceed on and take that with the vote of the rest of them at the end, unless you want, does anybody want to take that as an individual vote, 4600? Okay, lovely. 4670 Sandown Drive, would anybody like to speak on that one? 4800 Hampton Pier Avenue. Anybody? No. 4900 Ridgeway Cliff, we've already dealt with. I'll just make a note. Moving on to Whitstable now. 6100 Faversham Road. Officer recommendation is no action. Would anyone like to speak on this one? 6400 Borstal Hill. I believe Mr. Dance would like to speak on this one.
Thank you very much. I mean, again, if members could look at page 50. The plan is not up to date. There is considerable angst with 3 properties being built to the right-hand side of number 70. So on the subject of the new builds, there was a considerable discussion surrounding road safety at the time of the planning permission or the application. As a result, the driveways were widened, lengthened to allow for better access and egress to avoid the need to park on the carriageway. Personally, at this time, KCC Highways and possibly CCC officers or committee should have also requested parking restrictions through a planning condition, as it was clear that a hazard was foreseeable. Now, my elusive active sign, while this planning application was going through, was predated. So before any of these houses were built, I was after slowing down the traffic at the crown of Borstal Hill. It actually ends up as quite a good scheme if we implement, and I will propose that, the yellow lines, because we've worked the driveways, the egress, trying to get people not to park on the carriageway. When you look at the map, look at 64 and then the north sign, Between there is the elusive vehicle activated sign, 9 feet high, flashing 30, and I had the additional words on that model, slow down. I think that's pretty obvious what I was trying to achieve. And what we have here is the votes. Supporting 7, objection 6, neutral 1. So officers are saying could increase the speed of traffic. Well, I've got a huge, great sign there that took 3 years members' fund to finance and cost 10,000 quid. If you don't have the cars parked in front of the sign, it works 100% because it's radar. If you have a van parked in front of it, bumped up on the curb, sometimes the sign doesn't work. So we've got a convergence of two things. The houses are designed with bigger and wider driveways, keep them off the carriageway. We've got a huge, great sign. But there's been a lot of angst with the neighbours, not over the new builds. That's happened. They're built. So we've got what we've got. I would propose that we have the extended yellow lines down to the sign, the flashing slow down sign, and it all works very well together, and the sign works properly. That is my proposal, Chairman.
Is that the proposal as the original scheme that was consulted on, or a different?
Same.
Same.
I'm not looking at extending it. I could, but I'm not going to queer the pitch. I'm going to stick with the plan, or it does then go for further debate and reopens the debate. As it is, the length of yellow lines will work.
Can I ask Richard to respond on this one, and then Councillor Smith?
Yes, again, I mean, as Councillor Dancer said, our reservation was about the speed of traffic on what is already a problem area, as you've alluded to. We are reasonably comfortable about cars being parked there because of their slowing. They act as a slowing feature. But given the proposal, obviously we accept the board's views on that.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I do feel this is quite a difficult site. These 3 houses were built with inadequate parking, really. You can squeeze 1 car in, you've got to reverse out to get out. It's not ideal. If there's 2 cars in the household, they're stuffed. And I do note from the consultation that people on Pierpoint are particularly concerned about this, which is a small road off. I do think that the double yellows on the Pierpoint side are so that you can get the visibility to see out and see, to get in and get out. And it does mean that people have to wait if somebody wants to come down Borstal Hill and turn right to Pierpoint. Yes, you have to wait, but you're waiting for the next vehicles. I come out on Grimthorpe Avenue all the time to get onto Borstal Hill. It's my main route out of my badly designed one-way, system of sea salter over years of planning that's not given adequate, resources out. And it is a difficult there, but I do think that the cars do slow it down. And I understand that, Mr. Dance, sorry, I'm just trying to get me.
Whatever.
Yeah. Has got his sign up and it does flash away. And I think I've seen it working when cars are parked there. I sort of don't have sympathy for people buying a house on a main road and then being able to park outside on the main road, but I do think that it does slow the traffic down. So I'm voting with the officer recommendation on this.
Okay, Mr. Dance, just to be clear, your proposal is to implement the scheme as was consulted on against the officer recommendation. Do you have a seconder? Mr. Thomas, in which case we will take a vote. A vote for is to implement the scheme as per Mr. Dance's recommendation. A vote against is to go with the officer recommendation not to implement the scheme.
Mr Baker. Councillor Bland.
Against.
Councillor Bothwell.
Abstain.
Mr Brady.
Against.
Councillor Buckman.
Against.
Mr Dance.
For.
Miss Dawkins.
Again.
Councillor Howes.
For.
Councillor Moses.
Against.
Councillor Ricketts.
Against.
Councillor Naomi Smith.
Against.
Mr Soul.
Against.
Councillor Thomas.
For, please.
Mr Thomas.
For.
Mr Watkins.
Or.
That's 5 for, 8 against, 2 abstentions. So that's fallen.
Very well. We shall now move on to item number 6550. Sorry.
We just need to.
Oh, apologies. Officially, that the officer recommendation is approved. So that-
We would need to take a vote on the officer recommendation.
Do we need to take a vote? Apparently, we need to now take a vote on the officer recommendation on that as well.
If that's what you wish to propose.
Well, no, I think the amendment
Automatically go.
the amendment fell. Therefore, we go with the officer recommendation, unless anybody would like to. So yeah, the amendment fell. So we go with the officer recommendation on that one. Right. Sorry, I was just desperate to move on to the next item. Apologies for the haste there. Would anybody like to speak on item number 6550, Millstrode Road? The officer recommendation is no action. Item number 6620, Cromwell Road. The officer recommendation is to implement. Would anyone want to speak? Item number 6700, Tower Parade. The officer recommendation is to amend and implement. Would anyone like to speak on that one? I haven't got anyone listed to speak on any of these, but I do have to read through them, so just in case. Item number 6750, High Street. The officer recommendation is to implement. Would anybody like to speak on this item? Item number 6800, Old Bridge Road. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Item number 6910, Church Street. The officer recommendation is to amend and implement. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Item number 6925, Gloucester Road. Officer recommendation is to implement. Anybody? Item number 6930, Castle Road. Officer recommendation is no action. Would anyone like to speak on this one? Item number 7000, Queens Road and Battlesmere Road. Would anyone like to speak on this one? The officer recommendation is to implement. Item number 7050, The Heath. Officer recommendation is to implement. Would anyone like to speak? Item number 7075, officer recommendation to implement. Anybody? We have the same number for this one listed, 7075, but this is Mole Hill Road, officer recommendation to implement. Would anyone like to speak? Item number 7300, Herne Bay Road and Marine Crescent, officer recommendation is to implement. We now move on to the rural villages. Item number 8020, Jubilee Road. Officer recommendation is no action. Would anyone like to speak on that? Item number 8430, Mill Road. Officer recommendation is to implement. And item number 8450, Watmer Close. Officer recommendation is no action. Would anyone like to speak on that one? Thank you. Along with it, or do we just vote on all of these?
Yeah, we'll do that the same ways. Does it? Nobody's
Okay.
registered to speak.
The final three on these are the pay and display permits. We've got no one registered to speak on these. Item number 100 is the on-street pay and display charges. Would anyone like to speak to this item?
Could I just ask a quick question? Because on-street parking shouldn't make a profit, and I think the proceeds can kind of go towards new schemes. I just want to kind of clarify, is this just kind of cover additional costs, or is it to kind of pay for new schemes, or maybe both?
As I understand it, this increase is to cover the costs. Are we happy to take that on general assent with the rest of them, or do we want to vote separately on this? I'll take that as we're happy to take it on general assent with the rest of them, in which case, item number 110, permit prices, the officer's recommendation is to implement. And item number 120, visitor permit prices, the officer's recommendation is to implement. Would anyone like to speak on either of those? Okay. In which case, we shall move to a vote on all of those items, excepting the ones we've already... Sorry.
If it's okay, before we move to the vote, I just want to make a comment, and it's not going to take long. I'm getting increasingly concerned about meetings such as this, and Miss Dawkins raised a point earlier when she was talking about the pavement ban, where the car is going to park. I feel all we tend to do at these meetings when we have this is we put in more and more double yellow lines everywhere, and all it does is shift the parking problem elsewhere. If you're anywhere near a school, if you're in a road closer to the school, you want double yellows because you don't want them parked outside your house. If you're in a road such as Miss Dawkins was talking about earlier, you want the parking ban so you can't park on pavements. And I think what we need to do, as we've got a new transport strategy, we need to be really proactive to try and think of a way to try and solve this. And I think it's something which we're going to have to do, because I don't know the percentage of our district which has got double yellow lines in the urban areas, but I'm guessing it's increasingly large, and it's not acceptable for all the cars on the streets, and we're just moving the problem elsewhere. And I think it's something which we do need to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howes. Anybody else like to speak before we proceed to a vote? Very well. So we will now be voting on all of these items with the exception of item 650 Roper Road, item 690 Merchants Way, item 3160 Peartree Road, item 3300 Reculver Road, Parking Bay, item 4580 Dolphin Street, item 4900 Ridgeway Cliff, and item 6400 Borstal Hill, which we've already voted on separately. Is it a roll call or general assent? So we can take on general assent that we go with the officer recommendation on all other matters. Any objection? Noted. Mr. Baker abstains on all. Thank you very much. Can we get through the rest of the agenda before 10 o'clock? That's the question. We've already taken item number 9 earlier on. Item number 10 is the Highway Works Programme. Unfortunately, the KCC Highway Managers, Hazel Walters, would not be able to attend the meeting this evening. And it was a verbal update, I believe, wasn't it? There's no recorded vote required.
It would just be to note the update on page.
Just to note the update, do we have any comments on the update from the minutes there from the KCC Highways Manager? No. So I take by general assent that we've noted that report. We have no, just to note the monitoring of previous decisions, there's no significant updates unless anybody has anything to add on that. Lovely. In which case, that leaves the date of the next meeting, which is Tuesday the 18th of June at 7 p.m, subject to confirmation at the annual council meeting, which happens before that. We don't have any other urgent business to exclude the press or public. Unless anybody wants to raise anything, I shall bring the meeting to a close.